Today's lesson is Courage on the Front Lines, Why War Reporters Matter. Hello, everyone. I'm Mike.
I'm Roger.
And today we are going to be looking at a two-day article, I should say, and talking about war reporters, those brave individuals who go out and collect news from the world's most dangerous areas. Often, when there is conflict going on there, war reporters are a special breed of reporter. They often have to make do with the most basic living conditions. They're not often staying in hotels. In many cases, they're traveling with the troops, sleeping on the ground, eating military food and things like that as they dodge bullets and bombs to try to both report and tell us what's going on in these conflict zones, as well as send us back the images. The camera people as well who do this maybe don't get as much glory as the people we see there live on CNN reporting from dangerous places. But this is a very, very challenging, difficult, and stressful job, and it can also be a deadly job. It wasn't too long ago that in Gaza several reporters have been killed recently, so that shows that war reporters have been reporting and doing their work from war zones since, I think, going back to the Civil War was one of the first times, of the Crimean War in the 1850s was one of the first time reporters were out there on the front line, and they continue to do this very difficult but important work today.
Indeed, so you have to have courage on those front lines. Let's find out what this is all about. Let's listen to the first part right now.
Courage on the Front Lines, Why War Reporters Matter. In the 2018 film, A Private War, actress Rosamund Pike plays Marie Colvin, a real-life war journalist who reported from some of the world's most dangerous places. Colvin covered conflicts in countries like Syria, Libya, and East Timor, bringing attention to the suffering of civilians.
大家好，第一部分介绍名词 suffering， 它的意思是苦难、痛苦或是折磨。例如 Around the world, hunger causes much suffering. 在世界各地，饥饿引起许多苦难。再来看到名词 civilian， 表示平民、老百姓。例如 The soldiers were instructed not to harm any civilians during the conflict. 士兵们被指示在冲突中不得伤害任何平民。或是 7 soldiers and 2 civilians were killed by the attack. 那场攻击造成7名士兵和2名平民丧生。另外，这个字也能当形容词使用，它的意思是民用的或是平民的。例如 Civilian clothes are required during the non-duty hours of military personnel. 军人在非勤务时间必须穿着便服。也可以说 Hank is no longer in the army. He's living a regular civilian life now. Hank 退伍了，他现在过着平民的生活。
Okay, so remember, if there's a war going on, you might have the front line, or just simply the front. That's where most of the fighting is happening. Of course, in World War I, the front lines were in France there, outside of Paris. But here, you're going out to where all the fighting is going on, and we're trying to answer the question, why are reporters necessary? Why do they matter? Why should we have those war reporters? Well, we'll tell you why war reporters matter, why they are important. Now, in the 2018 film A Private War, actress Rosamund Pike plays Marie Colvin, a real-life war journalist who reported from some of the world's most dangerous places. So Rosamund Pike is an actress. I think she's British, and she played a real person whose name was Marie Colvin. She was a real-life war journalist, and she reported from very dangerous places in the world where wars were going on. Right now, I guess you could say that some of the world's most dangerous places are, of course, in Gaza, also in Ukraine. I think there's still a civil war going on in Congo and other various parts of the world. So, yeah, she went to such places to be a journalist, a photographer, and interviewing people and stuff like that.
There you go. War journalist, war reporter is probably the more common term, but yes, journalist, reporter, people who go out there, gather news, and write for newspapers or magazines, or also broadcast on television. It says Colvin, she was a very experienced war reporter. She covered conflicts in countries like Syria, Libya, and East Timor, to name just a few, bringing attention to the suffering of civilians. So when you cover something as a reporter, that basically means that's the story you're reporting on. All right, so if you cover politics, that's the type of thing that you do. do most of your reporting on. Some reporters will cover politics or economics or sports or technology. That is where they do most of their work, and most of the news that they report on falls under that subject matter, that category. And she was traveling around the world's conflict zones where the world was seeing, military activity or at least fighting. Syria, Libya, East Timor. This is, of course, going back many, many years when they've had conflicts at different times in those different areas. And all the time, reporters, especially war reporters, are bringing attention to the suffering of civilians. Of course, yes, they're reporting on what the armies are doing, what the soldiers are doing, what the generals' strategies are doing, but they're also looking at the average people, the normal people whose lives are being affected or in many cases absolutely destroyed by this fighting that happens to come to their part of the world, and that leads to a lot of suffering. Suffering is going through a bad experience of some kind that is very dangerous, that is very harmful to you. It could lead to injury or death, but suffering, it could be very personal. If you lose a best friend in an accident, that could be suffering of some kind, or it could be physical suffering, going through an illness, being in a lot of pain. It basically means that bad things are happening in your life and they're affecting you very profoundly and very directly. In this case, we're talking about the suffering of civilians. Sure, soldiers suffer in war as well, but they are the ones who are the active part. The civilians are the passive victims of war. They're just living there as the fighting goes on, and that's what civilians are. People who are not in the military, not in the government. They're just normal, average people. So unless you're actually in the army, you would be a civilian if we're talking about a war happening near where you live. So let's find out more about Marie Colvin and how war actually affected her very personally in the next part of our article. Even after losing sight in her left eye to an explosion while covering Sri Lanka's civil war in 2001, Colvin continued reporting until she was killed in 2012 while on assignment in Syria. Her story illustrates the core values of journalism: telling the truth, staying unbiased, and holding those in power accountable.
第二部分介绍名词 explosion 表示爆炸，可以说 Firefighters say the fire was caused by a gas explosion in the building. 消防员说这场火灾是大楼内瓦斯爆炸所引起的。又或者说 The sound of the huge explosion could be heard across the entire town. 巨大的爆炸声响彻整个城镇。下一个看到动词 illustrate， 它的意思是用例子来体现或是阐明。例如 The professor illustrated the complex concept with a practical example from everyday life. 该教授以日常生活中的实际例子来说明这个复杂的概念。再看一个例子 Kenneth's journey from poverty to a career in medicine illustrates the enormous value of education. Kenneth 从贫困到从事医疗行业的过程，说明了教育的重大价值。继续介绍单字 journalism， 这个名词指的是新闻业或是新闻工作。举例来说 Many students choose journalism because they want to uncover the truth for the public. 许多学生选择新闻业是因为他们想为大众揭露真相。或是Journalism requires both strong writing skills and a deep sense of responsibility. 新闻工作需要强大的写作能力以及深厚的责任感。另外补充相关名词 journalist, J-O-U-R-N-A-L-I-S-T, journalist, 表示新闻记者。例如 The actors talk to journalists about their new movie. 那些演员与记者谈论他们的新电影。最后看到 unbiased， 这个形容词表示无偏见的或是公正的。可以说 As a professional critic, Charles always tries to remain unbiased when writing his reviews. 身为职业评论家 Charles 总是尽量保持公正撰写评论。最后一个例子 The report provided an unbiased view of the company's financial situation. 该报告提供了对公司财务状况的公正观点。
Okay, so here in the second part of our lesson today, it says, even after losing sight in her left eye to an explosion while covering Sri Lanka's civil war in 2001, Colvin continued reporting until she was killed in 2012 while on assignment in Syria. Okay, so remember Syria was having a civil war for a while, then suddenly it ended. The rebels took over rather quickly. It was very unexpected, but at the time in 2012, the war was going on. It was quite violent. She was killed at that time in 2012, and then she lost her sight in one of her eyes. If you lose sight, you lose the ability to see. So sight is one of your senses, along with hearing and taste and touch and things like that. So she lost vision in one of her eyes, in her left eye, so she could only see with her right eye, and she lost sight in her left eye because of an explosion in Sri Lanka. An explosion, of course, is when a bomb explodes, and of course there's fire, there's loud noise and everything, so you can get killed if there's an explosion nearby. To explode is the verb. I could say lots of people died in the atomic bomb explosion in Hiroshima back in 1945. And in this particular case, though, she was getting the news in Sri Lanka because a civil war was going on back in 2001. I assume they're talking about the Tamil Tigers fighting against the government. Eventually, the Tamils lost.
Absolutely. Colvin continued reporting until she was killed in 2012 while on assignment in Syria. So this is a very sad ending to this story, but it also shows the danger that war reporters face daily. So she continued reporting even after she'd been injured. I'm sure her editors or whoever she worked for, whatever newspaper, whoever she worked for, said, hey, it's okay if you want to come home and hang up your press pass and have a desk job in some safe country, that's fine. But she knows she was dedicated to her job, and that is an amazing thing about war reporters. They often do have, the best of them, the most dedicated, do have very long careers, even at a job that most people would not want to do for more than a day. They do for years. So she continued reporting until, unfortunately, she was eventually killed in 2012. I think she might have been shot in that case while on assignment in Syria. So yeah, as Roger said, she was covering the civil war in Syria that just ended recently. Very long running a war. And on assignment basically means you're going on a job. Often when a company sends you away to do something, they're sending you on an assignment. And this is a word we often see used with journalism and news gathering. They'll send the reporters out on assignment. You know, we're sending you on assignment to Hualien to cover the earthquake that happened there recently. Or we're sending you on assignment to Taidong because we expect a typhoon to be arriving this weekend. So you're going to go down there. You're going to report on it. We'll send a camera crew. They will be on assignment with you. We're sending you somewhere to do some specific job or task. And that is an order from your boss. And her story, her experience, her life illustrates the core values of journalism: telling the truth, staying unbiased, and holding those in power accountable. It's a very important job, even when it's a dangerous or even deadly job. But her story illustrates, it shows that this is why journalism is so important. To illustrate something, is basically to demonstrate, to show in a very sort of real way. We can describe it, we can talk about it, we can talk about the ideas by using all these big words, but we can actually just show you in a real way. Look at this. This is evidence. We don't need to explain more. We just have to let you understand this story, and you'll understand the point that we're trying to make. So it illustrates the importance and the core values of journalism.
Yep, give some extra information in the form of charts or whatever, or pictures or whatever, but here just shows us the core values of journalism. Journalism, of course, is the study of being a reporter. So, of course, if you go to university, say at Missouri or something, they've got a pretty good journalism school there.
Columbia, too?
Yeah, that sounds right. It would be called the School of Journalism, not the School of Reporting. No, you wouldn't say that. Journalism, of course, is the science of getting information and reporting it to people using various media. And she was telling the truth. Of course, these are the core values of journalism. You want to tell the truth. You don't want to lie. And you want to stay unbiased. If you're unbiased, that means you're not really favoring one kind of opinion over another. Of course, we have this problem all the time in the media. Like for here in Taiwan, of course, you've got different kinds of media that are probably very biased. One particular TV channel likes one political party, whereas the other one likes another party, so they're biased. Or maybe even some of them are unbiased. They're more fair, or they're fairer. And of course, if you're a journalist, you need to be as fair as possible. And, of course, you need to hold those in power accountable if they're responsible for harming people. You need to mention this so that they're punished or they're taken out of office or whatever. A lot of times that just doesn't happen. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our article for today. Here comes the third part.
Journalists in war zones are often independent or work for international news agencies, which enables them to report more truthfully. Because state-run media often serves only the interests of those in power, it doesn't always tell the truth. For example, it may spread misinformation about, or avoid reporting on, attacks on civilians, destroyed homes, or humanitarian crises. In contrast, independent journalists frequently help the world see what's happening in real time, including during recent wars in Gaza, Sudan, and Ukraine. As a result, their photos and stories can bring global attention and pressure leaders to act. All right, back to our article. So we're learning more about the very challenging but important job that war reporters do in bringing stories from the world's conflict zones to us in the safer, peaceful parts of the world so we understand what's going on around us. It says journalists in war zones are often independent or work for international news agencies, which enables them to report more truthfully. That's a very good point. So a war zone, as we mentioned, that could also be called a conflict zone because some places it's not actually a war. It's called something else. I think in Ukraine they're calling it a police action or something like that, but it's actually a war, but sometimes they use other terms. But war zone is, yes, basically a place where soldiers are fighting and bombs are going off, and it's very, very dangerous to be there. But the journalists who do this, they're often independent or work for international news agencies. An independent journalist could also be called a freelancer. They basically go out there, write stories, and then try to sell them to people who want information, who want those stories in their newspaper, or they work for international news agencies. So an agency is a group or a company that does a certain type of work. You can think of a law firm as a type of agency. You might have a real estate agency that sells property and sells homes and houses and apartments and things like that. An international news agency, this wouldn't be state news, so this wouldn't be something that's set up by the government. Like BBC would not be an international news agency so much as CNN could possibly be described that way. Also, some of the more well-known ones like Reuters and UP, United Press, these aren't really affiliated. They're kind of international. They might have a head office in New York or London, but they have reporters all around the world, often in many different languages. And their job is to basically find the news, report on the news, and sell those stories to smaller media outlets who don't have the money to have their own reporters there on site in different parts of the world. And this enables them to report more truthfully. They're not sort of supporting a certain government or a certain corporation's agenda. They're to tell the truth. They're able to do it without fear or favor, without worrying about pleasing someone or making someone angry for expressing a point of view. They're telling the truth as they see it.
Other kinds of agencies would include travel agencies, real estate agencies, and talent agencies if you're an actor looking for work. Okay, so again, we've got these news agencies, and of course they work for them, and they're trying to tell us the truth. And because state-run media often serves only the interests of those in power, it doesn't always tell the truth. Okay, so of course, there's probably no freedom of the press in North Korea, of course. Their media there is state-run. The government runs the media. They tell you what they want to tell you, and they don't let people have different opinions. If you have a different opinion, of course, you're going to suffer because of that. And if someone is in power, they are in charge. They're the fearless leader. And of course, they probably don't want to lose their power as well, like Putin in Russia or Kim in North Korea, and there are others, of course. And yes, indeed, if it's state-run, we don't always get the truth. Now, for example, it may spread misinformation about or avoid reporting on attacks on civilians, destroyed homes, or humanitarian crises. Okay, so again, if you're talking about state-run media, they may spread misinformation about certain things. Misinformation, of course, is incorrect information. And of course, they're probably just wanting to make themselves look good. So if there's a flood or something and they didn't respond to it properly, they're not going to make themselves look bad. So of course, they're going to spread misinformation about what they did. Oh, see, our fearless leader has helped all these people because of the recent flooding. What a great person. So of course, they spread that misinformation. Or they also avoid reporting on something. Let's just not talk about that because it might make us look bad. And, of course, these could be attacks on civilians. If they mow down civilians with machine guns or something like that, you won't hear about that. Or destroyed homes, that makes them look bad. And then if something's a humanitarian crisis, that means it has to do with people suffering, like in a flood or some sort of disaster, or because of starvation. They just don't have enough food to feed everybody.
That's right. And of course, that's the country that is inflicting these crimes on people. They won't want those stories out there, especially through their own media sources. In contrast, or in comparison, in the opposite way, independent journalists like Marie Colvin and those ones who work for these international media groups, they frequently help the world see what's happening in real time. They do it without bias. They do it without sort of trying to pick a side and make that side look better at the expense of the truth. They do it in real time as well. They do it live. They're not sort of reporting stories that happened a day or two ago. They're reporting stories that happened hours or even minutes ago, including during recent wars in Gaza, Sudan, and Ukraine, all of which are dangerous places for reporters to be working. I think the Israeli government has banned all reporters from entering Gaza, so getting any stories out of there is a real challenge. As a result, their photos and stories can bring global attention and pressure leaders to act. Without these stories, without the pictures that come out especially, that can be very powerful and very emotional, and the stories that give us the background and the reality of what's going on, a lot of these conflict zones and the civilians who suffer in them would not get this global attention. They would be ignored or forgotten, or people would go, yeah, I heard about that, but I don't really know what's going on. And of course, nothing good could come of that. And it also puts pressure on the leaders to act when the government is saying, oh, everything's fine, and all our soldiers there are being very noble and not hurting anyone. And then, of course, we see the pictures of those soldiers not acting in that way. It can put pressure on those leaders, public pressure, and of course, government pressure from other foreign governments can be put on those bad actors, those countries that are sort of abusing people, and get them to limit the damage that they do or the atrocities that they might commit.
Okay, let's end our lesson today by listening to Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第3部分有一句提到，由于国营媒体往往只为当权者的利益服务，因此不一定总是说出真相。文中是用 those in power 来表达当权者， be in power 是表达当权执政，那么 those in power 就可以表达执政者、在位者。我们可以把它视为从 those who are in power 简化而来，那省略了关系代名词 who， 再将 be 动词改成现在分词 being， 然后再进一步省略，就变成了 those in power。 好，那我们来学习这样的用法。首先 those who 加动词是表达凡是怎么样的人，那些怎么样的人，其中的 those 是指 those people 那些人。哪些人呢？我们后面就接了 who 引导的关系子句来修饰先行词 those， 就可以修饰表达出那些怎么样的人，凡是怎么样的人。特别注意关系子句里面的动词要用复数动词，所以我们看个例子，像 those who are allowed to enter， 那些被允许进入的人， those who work hard， 那些努力工作的人。好，接着 those who 加动词可以简化成 those 加 VING 或 PP， 也就是说呢，我们把关系代名词 who 省略，然后把它后方的动词改成分词。动词如果是主动，就是用现在分词 VING， 被动就是用过去分词 PP。 所以像我们刚刚举的例子， those who are allowed to enter 可以简化成those allowed to enter， 还有 those who work hard 就可以简化成 those working hard。 好，那课文接着举例说，国营媒体可能会散布关于平民遭受攻击、家园被毁或人道主义危机的假消息，或者是呢避而不谈这些事情。好，文中用到 misinformation 来表达错误资讯、假消息，那它是由字首 MIS 表示错误的、不当的，搭配 information 资讯消息，把它组合而来。好，那我们这边来介绍一下 MIS 这个字首，它可以表达不好、错误或是缺乏等等否定、不适宜的那种意思。当这个字首跟动词结合的时候，三态变化就会跟它原本的动词相同。那我们用 mislead 这个动词来当例子，它是由字首 MIS 表示错误的，加上字根 lead 表示带领、引导，合在一起 mislead 就是误导，使什么产生错误想法。那因为 lead 它的动词三态是 lead、led、led， 所以 mislead 它的动词三态就会是 mislead、misled、 misled。 好，那我们以下再补充几个带有这个字首的单字。第一个 misuse， 它是由 mis 不当加上 use 使用合在一起，也就是误用使用不当的意思。再来 mishandle， 它是由 mis 表示不好不当加上 handle 处理合在一起， mishandle 就是对什么处置不当。再来 mistrust， 它是由 mis 表示缺乏加上 trust 信任合在一起， mistrust 就是表达猜疑不信任。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天的单字吧。
Civilian. When the war broke out, many civilians were forced to leave their homes. Explosion. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion that created a huge cloud of smoke and fire. Assignment. Cliff's first assignment as a reporter was to cover the parade celebrating the team's big victory. Illustrate. The new sales results illustrate how small changes can make a big difference. Journalism. A career in journalism typically requires strong writing skills and a desire to keep the public informed. Agency. A reporter from the news agency spoke with several sources to confirm the accuracy of the report.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I am Mike.
See you next time.